Hello, everybody. Welcome to this AI data governance webinar. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. So, all right. Thank you, Janet. Let's go ahead and kick things off. Again, thank you all for joining. We are going to be talking about AI and data security and data governance. Today, we've got a great panel, and we've already had some really interesting discussions around this topic. I'll go ahead and get things started off. My name is Aaron Greer. I am a security solution architect with Atmosera. Atmosera is a Microsoft partner. We focused on the Azure platform, doing both professional services and managed services for our clients, and also managed security services and professional services engagements around security, enabling security capabilities, and helping to raise the security posture of our clients. And we provide managed SOC and manage specific security workloads as well, and do training to make sure that your people can effectively use these tools in your environment. And we are joined today by people from AIGG, AI Governance Group. So,
Janet, thank you, Aaron. I'll just jump in and say we're really grateful to be here. My name is Janet Johnson. We actually have two panelists on, Leon Ye, who is our machine learning data scientist, data layer guy, and then Carrie Giovanni, who unfortunately can't somehow get on camera, which is a loss for everyone, I think. But Carrie, do you mind at least saying hi so we make sure we can hear you?
Hola.
Okay, there you go. And Carrie is one of our risk forward people on the team. And we are working with Atmosera to make sure that the data governance goes at all levels. Know that I am going to be watching for questions that come in. So if you get any questions during the webinar, please put them in the question area, the Q&A area, and I'll be watching for that. Rachel and I'll also watch the chat in case anything goes along. And with that, if we can go to the next slide, please, we're just going to start this off a bit of a conversation. As Aaron said, we've had some really interesting conversations in preparation for this. And so Leon actually took part of the conversation and put it into what I think is a really interesting way to think about how AI and governance fits into, and the notion of data governance fits into kind of some familiar other kinds of layered models. And with that, Leon, do you kind of want to walk through what you're thinking here in terms of the different layers? Thank you.
Yeah, let me quickly introduce myself with a little bit my background, and then kind of like context to this layer approach that we are thinking in AIGG. I started as a digital enterprise application development. We built business for Toyota, any enterprise company for almost 30 years. During that time, I'm going from client server developments, architecture, all the way to the mobile web and so forth. So I'm kind of used to with this, like the OSI model and TCP/IP model. So after a while, after 30 years, I stumbled upon this technology called AI that everybody's talking now. and I start looking at it, the more I look into it, is that I see the importance of data. Data is used for everything. Usually used to be used for analytics, it used to be used for marketing, but now it's going to be used to create a new intelligent or new model in AI terms. So when I start looking at this thing, I say, wait a minute, I've seen this before, but the only difference is that instead of collecting data, we collecting specification to build it. So, and also at the same time, when I start doing data machine learning, I start seeing the importance of having what I call trusted data. Data that, is not, just because you can collect it, it doesn't mean that you should use it to train your model. And then the challenge that we see in AIGG is that how can we make sure that all of the data coming from, whether coming from another department and from Silo can be used and then kind of pulled together, centralized, and then converted this thing as a trusted data. And that's kind of the layer approach that we use in AIGG, is like not one single layer's responsible for everything. I've seen so many ways, like engineers typically like to make things as open as possible, and then let the IT folks or cybersecurity upstairs to worry about securing everything. I think that's kind of like our different approach of that. When you go to the AI, it's very important to layer all of your data access, and because of it, we come up with we kind of inspired by the internet model by breaking those things into like 5 section layers. Layer 0 is the governance. Layer 1 is the data, where we store the data. 2, 3 is the the access and transport. This is when you're securing the transportation of data. And finally, the application itself could be ChatGPT, could be predictive AI, could be recommendation. So by separating those things, we can do a much better job. The reason we said that layer 0 is a governance is what I think about it is the concept of agile development, that we use this thing when developing enterprise application. I think those concepts should be also applied to the AI by coming up with like agile governance, where we start thinking, instead of in a specification focus, we should think about the data focus, because now data is used to do everything, including creating the application itself. So it's kind of required kind of mindset difference, and then by using proper layering, especially when we spend more time on the governance, we're going to spend less time on the top layer, because I call it like hope is a lot of people, especially engineers, we always call we have is like we hope it works. I call it hope as a security. I think we should start thinking about planning better, and especially dealing with data governance.
And Aaron, you're the security layers here, right? Now that's your perspective, right?
Well, I'm the security layers and role and access, and less on the data layer, some on the data layer. But that said, I'm as concerned about the governance layer as anyone. I mean, coming from a consulting background, we need to have the requirements. We need to know, what are the regulatory compliance implications of the environment that we're working in. We need to know how that translates into security baseline, security, the controls that we need to put in place. And if we don't have that, then what is the level of security, or what is the type of control that we're trying to put in place? We need to know where we're trying to navigate to in order to put in a plan to get there. So, yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry, go ahead, Jenny.
But no, I was just going to ask Carrie, since you're kind of layer 0 and not on camera, I'm going to rely on you to pipe in here when you have brilliance to add. But one of the conversations we were having earlier, Leon was talking, and Aaron, this was interesting to me. You can tune your data layer to a whole bunch of different objectives as an organized, as a data scientist. Is that correct, Leon? You can tune it to maximizing for different things, right? And does that makes ripple effects all up and down in terms of your strategy around AI, correct?
So the way I look at it is like governance layer is the one that decided what we call in AI or machine learning world AI alignment, where you start set the objectives. Unlike regular development, typically, Aaron, you basically get the you start working when the application finished, right? And then that's usually when you discover, I say, hey, wait a minute, what you guys doing here is the data is not correct. Now you're trying to work around the existing part.
I would actually back that up. In a perfect world, right? We have security architects working along with the application development team to make sure that those security requirements are being represented in the architecture, right? If we're talking everything from data encryption, encryption at rest, encryption in transit, the RBAC models that we're using to govern access, the the network segmentation, the pieces of the architecture needing to authenticate with each other to make sure that we're doing that assumption of breach, zero trust in our architecture. So ideally, we'd be involved during that.
Okay. But usually you don't go down to the database structure, like figure out what PID, what is empty missing category, and so forth. And usually later on, when they go to machine learning scientists, they usually start, they usually get the problem. So, so what I learned when I start doing this thing for 7 years as a machine learning scientist, I start looking at it. Most of my headache is actually collecting the data and making sure the data. Only I spend my time, like about 10 to 20% is, like fine tuning the model. When I went there, I have a concept that I'm going to spend most of my time on tuning the AI model. I end up spending more like a database admin. and then all the problem that we see, I'm not talking about the security at the high level, but the database security, the data itself at the row level security. And then that's what I think what Janet mentioned is that we should start thinking about this not at the kind of like a block, like a software stack level, but we have to go down to the data layer itself. And by having a governance, we can now start thinking about and then this is including everybody in the like the security people, the ML people, and also application developer people. What we can start thinking about is like, what is the machine learning or this AI model that we're building right now for? What we are optimizing for. That's what the AI alignment is all about. It's like, are we optimizing for risk? Are we optimizing for revenue? Are we optimizing for compliance and so forth? Having those things set up early on, allowing every layer 1, layer 2, layer all the way to the top, we start to know where is how are we going to work together, right?
So Leon, I'm going to quickly ask you then, Carrie, when should the compliance and risk management professionals get involved here? I mean, we're getting really technical really quickly, and I'm not sure the audience is all, if you're with Atmosera, you know your stuff. So we're, I think we're in pretty good shape here. But Carrie, when do the compliance and risk management folks get involved? How does that work?
Well, I would say that risk management gets involved immediately, and because they will benefit from hearing the context around the discussions, and they will hear things and pick up on things that maybe someone who's really focused on the detail and the technical stuff might not be thinking about all the time. They'll probably notice some of the same issues, but they'll also be listening with a risk management ear, and they'll have an understanding for what the board's appetite for risk is, and really like what the board has decided that the priorities are going to be. Compliance is an interesting question because that can be a very rules-based. If you're trying to comply with a specific law, for example, you can build in your parameters, and maybe a company already has those built in, right? If you're already complying with GDPR, what else is there to do? Well, maybe now they've got to deal with this new AI regulation that's come out. And if that's the case, if it's something new, then I would say get your compliance people involved on the front end, and then they can tell you how many of those meetings they still need to be involved in, or they can figure out which issues are actually relevant to what they're doing. But I think it's important to have a very cross-functional team from the get-go, because I like to say we're all tech now. Whether you're a tech company or not, there's a new I would just say skill set that the 21st century worker has to have. And it's at least some basic awareness around AI and its uses and its priorities and its limitations, and what it was designed for, what data it was used to train, right? All of that. And if you start building that knowledge base now, it's like we all had to take typing in junior high or whatever so we could work our keyboards. This is, that times a million. And the sooner you get all the, different functional areas of your business thinking together about those things, the more you're going to be able to implement that in a much more robust way, which is the standard under the new AI the NIST regulations, which is they look really at the robustness of how your model is working and how your risk management is working. So risk management immediately, compliance probably at least the initial meetings, and then let them decide if they still need to keep coming, but they'll probably need to be there for at least some of the important decisions.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And Aaron, you're oftentimes the guy in charge of these kinds of things, right?
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, right?
And so my answer is also, the governance and that regulatory review needs to be there right at the beginning, because we've had in some of our previous discussions, here's my rather unsexy view of things, that AI changes nothing, even while it changes everything, and then you come back around to it changing nothing again. And I'll unpack what I mean. If we're talking about our data that is going to either feed the learning of our large language models, or if we're looking at the data that is going to be operated on by these AI-enabled applications, right? Coming back to Leon's, fundamental, what is it for, right? What is its job? Then we need to know what data does it need access to do that job. And if we're looking at our data, we need to have a good idea of what kind of data do we have. Do we have a good data classification scheme? Do we have data classification mechanisms or data labeling mechanisms even? Because we need to put in place an information protection strategy that says, hey, you know what? We've got roles that have certain types of access to certain types of data classifications. And then once we start enabling these AI-driven applications, they're all going to be operating under a service principal, and we get that service principal assigned to that role in the same way that if it was a person, if it's Aaron or if it's Leon, sitting down and doing that data crunching instead of an AI agent, what kind of access would we have?
Right.
And then looking at who's going to be interacting with it, and making sure that when we've got anyone querying an application, that's coming in through a security context as well, which can then be overlaid on the security context that the application itself has, and take that, lowest level of access, right, to make sure that nothing is coming across that needs to not come across.
And I've got a comment from Benjamin who said, I've seen several companies needing to begin their AI journey, but starting with a simple compliance or supervision-driven AI risk assessment to learn what exposure and current use the company has. Most companies are exposed to AI/ML now, but aren't even aware of where and how their teams are using it. I think we've found that to be very true. Carrie, you've spoken to a lot of folks out there, and I think we're finding leadership doesn't really understand how AI is being used in their organization yet, correct?
That's right. I mean, I think some of the ladies we've talked to have said, well, we're not really using AI. And I'm like, are you sure? Because your vendors are out there furiously updating their terms of service to describe and expand the types of data that they can collect while you're using their services and how they can use it. And one of the common uses we're seeing is that they can use your data to train their models. Whether they're doing it or not, Zoom is claiming they don't, for example, even though they give themselves the right to, is a question. And so I think you're right off the bat, doing an inventory of where the tools are actually coming in. And are these generative AI tools? Are they, really just algorithmic things that are built into something that aren't really going to present the same kinds of risks? Like really getting your head around where that exposure is and how much of it's internal and frankly, how much of it's external. Because again, think about your vendors who you may rely on for any number of things, including being custodians of your data, processing your data, who are updating their terms of service. And so AI is creeping in, whether we like it or not. And the head in the sand strategy, while feels really good and safe for a little while, is probably not going to serve you well in the long run because it's there. And I would much rather have eyes wide open assessment of what my risk is and where it's coming in, and then try to quantify it and then try to prioritize it, because you're not going to be able to manage it all at once. But even a very basic, okay, what do we have? What are the basic risks? What are the mitigation things that we could do right now just to make a difference? And then we'll come back with a more developed plan once we've had a little time to get into it a little deeper. But your employees are using it, your vendors are updating their terms of service, they're built into your software as service, they're built into the apps that you're using. So it's already in your organization, whether you want to admit it or not.
Leanne, I can see you nodding your head furiously there for a while, right?
I'm sometimes at machine learning, we are trying to optimize things, and without any kind of directive from the organization. And then the worst thing you ask for is if we don't, since we don't have a direction, typically we optimize for what we think it is the best, which is revenue. And that's kind of my aha moment. I said, this is not supposed to be a data scientist job to decide what to optimize. This should be a collaborative effort from the C-level to the cybersecurity to the compliance, privacy, and should be done early on, not at the machine, when machine learning folks working on the inference engine and get the right accuracy. That's the kind of like building something before and then decided what its purpose is. So it's kind of like upside down the way we do things. We kind of do this thing because it's fast moving technology, but now we have to kind of slow things down and kind of like, hey, how do we do this thing holistically? And then so we don't create any harm in the future.
Yeah, and the architecture, and you brought up a good point, right, about the data that we use to train our models, and how necessarily tied, when you're seeing this tuning going on, Leon, how necessarily tied to that is the data that it will be operating on a regular basis.
Right.
Is that Venn diagram a perfect circle? Is it, usually some great amount of overlap?
So the data usually come depending on your need. You can do batch mode or stream mode, meaning like, as you started with something, like let's say 3 years of data to train this model. Once you do this, you can now stream additional data as the orders data coming in or customer behavior data coming in. And that's more like an evolving model. I'm not sure if I answer your question, Aaron, but that's kind of how data is built. It's usually started with something static, then on and then it's adding on a stream
yeah, that wasn't quite what I was getting at, but that separation, right? When you've got that stream of data coming in, depending on how it's coming in, some of it may be relevant to the job that AI-driven application has to do, and some of it may not.
Okay.
So how do you generally approach sorting out data that doesn't need to be in there?
Okay, great question. Typically, when the data coming in, it went through some kind of pipeline, and this can be used by Azure pipeline or any other pipeline. And during that process, that AI flow, we separate the data, and that's the job of data scientists to figure out which data it needed. I don't think it's just data scientist's job. It should be the whole corporation job to figure out which data we should fit it in. But they can start with ML. Folks can start it, but you know what? We should have some discussion. Which data, just because I think it's a good way, without knowing what the objective is, and that's kind of what I'm seeing so far is like everybody want to go to the market the fastest, and the metric is being used. Go to the market. I said, wait a minute. It could be also risks we have to worry about. So go to the market and risk. So when you start doing this, it's very difficult to ask the ML data scientists to think risk when they don't have the, like a skill like a Kerry has or something like that. So that's what I start seeing is like, there's kind of like a mismatch, and there's going to be decision made, not the right decision at the right time.
Yeah,
so can I ask a quick question I want to make a quick summary, and that is what I'm hearing each one of you say is before you start to implement something new, figure out why. What is the why, right? I mean, it could be speed to market, it could be revenue enhancement, it could be saving time, it could be making people more productive, but the why and the strategy around implementing with AI is am I making this up? But that is the number one thing that I'm hearing all of you say. Is that correct?
Yes.
Right. And that has to be cross-functional, and it has to be, and there needs to be the C-suite, but there also needs to be, everyone in the organization is aligned on the why, correct?
Right.
Okay. So once that's done, Aaron, what scares you about this? What should you, as the security expert in the room, what's your next step in terms of effectiveness here?
So, I want the basics to happen, right? I think we're going to get the most bang for our buck, just like in other parts of the security world. Any cybersecurity guy is going to say, enable MFA, get your patching done on time, get a password manager. After that, we'll talk. So I want to have people who are doing this work, even if you're not doing this work, have a really good idea of your data estate. Know what's out there, know what your repos are, have a data classification strategy, have a data access and governance strategy, so that when you start building new unusual things that are going to access and operate on that data, that you've got a model to handle it. The other half of that would be data minimization into those repositories and into our applications, right? It's again, knowing why something is going on. Why are we putting this application in place? What kind of data do we need? We should not be ingesting any data that we don't need in the first place. And that will keep us out of trouble because, what if somebody is talking to a chatbot and enters, PII, PHI that gets put into the wrong database, and now you're not in compliance anymore. And I'll leave it to our experts to talk about that kind of scenario. But we're also looking here at how to create things that work things that work the way we want them to work. And looking at, again, we've talked about this, the continuous work that needs to be done to verify that our AI models are behaving in the way that they're supposed to. Whether it's breach, security breach, whether it is something in the model isn't working right, we need the equivalent of that assumed breach that we would do in security architecture, right? If we're designing something that has multiple architectural components, we need to assume that something has been compromised so that we can protect ourselves from the ripple effects of that going across our environment. And getting to the point where we're designing our AI-driven applications and workloads with that assumption of compromise in some way. So how do we build in the safeguards to say, you know what, if all of a sudden this is coming off the rails, how do I protect my data? How do I protect my customers from that?
Build it in.
Yeah.
Build that in. That's awesome. Leon, what scares you from your metadata layer, et cetera?
I think if we implementing this layer approach, I mean, the data get filtered out as we going up to the top of layer. So it's, unlike before, like the layers data gonna be proper, just going up to the chain. It should be filtered as needed basis. If you know the why, for example, if you want, you want to know about certain thing, there's a lot of data that you don't need to. So by having all this layer is important. The one that scared me the most is not having like what you say, Aaron, is like repository of where is my data being consumed and all being produced. And that's what layer one data governance is in the data layer stuff, is creating what we call a data catalog, where we found where it is the data, how it get used, and the why get used. And hopefully we can also probably including some metadata about the alignment. What is the objective? So before we start building, if we build this thing, you can now go to this master catalog data scheme. You can search by table name and then figure out what its purpose. It makes everybody's jobs easier. And we not having this layer, for example, as a data scientist, sometimes I'm looking at this data and I can see everybody. And that scares me. I mean, because as soon as I feed this thing into this my ML algorithm, they can start making a decision based on something that I probably not even aware, because I don't have time to look into all of the columns and so forth. And that's why I think about it. It should be separated as its own layer, and it should be handled by just not one person or one department, but the whole organization.
Carrie, I'm going to throw the same question over to you. Of all the things that we've talked about so far, what is your biggest cautionary tale? This is really helpful.
What scares me? Class action lawsuits. Class action lawsuits scare me. So
talk to me about that.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, you've seen them in the headlines every time there's a data breach and someone's health information or financial information or their PII has been compromised. Even if you don't end up having to pay a very big fine, those lawsuits are extremely expensive. Like, you've got your regulator coming after you too, sort of separate from the lawsuit. But let's say at the end of the day, the settlement ends up being not that huge. It is still a management headache, a massive time suck, a massive resource suck. I could tell you right now, nobody in the C-suite wants to work on a class action lawsuit. They want that to go away. So I would say number one would be that. Number two would be being in the headlines for all the wrong reasons and destroying my brand. I mean, that would just be awful and embarrassing. I wouldn't want to be associated with that. I would rather be known as, hey, we tried, and despite our best efforts, X, Y, and Z happened, but we designed a really smart system, and we've been very diligent about it, and so the damage was, very small, and now we've learned some things where I take ownership of it. But we're seeing a lot of cell phones right now in the headlines, and you want to feel sorry for these people, but also, they were warned and they chose to, run, I guess, while still trying to put their pants on. And that is a more successful strategy for some people than others. I would also say, just on a personal level, what scares me is the erosion of human and civil rights, the ability to turn everything over to the machines who just amplify biases and inequities, especially when we have intelligence at scale right now. We don't need to have these tools that paint with such a broad brush. We can actually have tools that work on different profiles and different risk settings and for different types of users. And while it takes time to create those things, we have these capabilities, but the question is, like, what are you going to use it for? And I would love to see some really enterprising, smart folks out there using it to find ways to leverage the technology in a really smart way that's smart for everyone, where the benefits of AI are shared broadly throughout society. And that's what the EU is trying to do with its legislation. And I expect that the US will follow suit at some point, but it's going to be a slow process. And the reality is, Leon says, this is a very fast moving technology, and it's okay to be innovative and run out there and be trying to throw your governance in place at the same time you're doing stuff. Of course, if you could start at the very beginning and build everything from the ground up, that's great. But for most companies, they're in the middle of running in a million different directions. And there are going to be some things that have to be backfilled, and there are going to be other things where you literally can build it from the ground up. And I think knowing the distinction between those things. So let's say lawsuits, embarrassing myself in the headlines, and collapse of society.
And so to that end, those are all the fears. How do we, it sounds like, I would say we are all very bullish on making sure that every organization has an opportunity to use AI. How do you jumpstart the process? Aaron, I'm going to throw that one to you.
That is a great question. So start small and use it as this is my own personal response, right? When I am playing around with things like previews of Security Copilot, right? Wow, I can look at a problem that's coming in. I can look at an indicator, and I can have it write a response automation workbook for me, and
Wow.
do a review and put it in place. And if I'm not sure, like, put it in place, but let me just see the what if on it, and the turnaround to be able to respond to events or indicators of compromise becomes much, much tighter. And being able to apply that machine learning logic, there's always a race between the black hats and the white hats in this world. And so being able, and the black hats have the initiative always, right? So minimizing that gap between the initiative, the advantage that the bad actors have is the place where I am most intrigued. And I know that's kind of my personal response, not an overall professional place. But yeah, I would start with the things that are built into the products. Look at your vendors, make sure that they're good about not using your data to train their models. At least, again, that they're not saying it, or they won't do it without you saying okay.
Mm-hmm.
We deal with this a lot with Copilot for M365 and now Security Copilot. So
Thank you.
I would start there.
Leon, where would you start to jumpstart this thing?
To start, I think I have a 4-step approach, and this is because my pain as a ML scientist. I think the first one is plan your AI journey. You might be starting in the beginning, or you probably already halfway there with playing around with the ChatGPT. Start with your journey, knowing that this is not going to be one-step process. This is going to be years. This is AI is as big as the internet. And then how do you start it? Start it with why. I think you, Janet, you mentioned already. Sometimes we forgot to ask why are we doing this. What this model supposed to do? Are we want to make like prediction on certain thing, knowing that it's a prediction, not the real, not objective versus subjective. That's number one. Number two, align your goal early on. Like I said, figure out what you're optimized for. You don't want your ML scientist to make decision like this for you. And trust me, we do this all the time, and we get scared sometimes. And the third thing, once you have your goal, start focus on what I call people, process, and tools. A lot of organizations, they jump directly to the tools. Like ChatGPT, the next generation of Google, they bring those things in without involving the people and not having a process. And that's when really stressing out a lot of ML folks like me. I'm speaking this thing from engineer's point of view. We don't want to be responsible for everything. We can do it, but it's better to have it as a process and bring everybody together and making sure everybody involved, engaged. This is not an engineering project. This is not cybersecurity project. This is the whole company project. And the fourth one is that thinking about this thing like it's not a one-time. The fourth action is that think about this thing is like in the long term. It should be a continuous improvement. It's not data governance is not things that you just attend once a year. It should be continuously. In engineering world, we call it agile development. We have this concept called CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous development, and that's done when we build an application. But when we're living in an AI era, I think we need to have another layer called CG, CI, CD, continuous governance, continuous integration, and continuous deployment. And that's by doing this, we getting better, 1% better every day. And that's kind of step process. Plan, set your goal, people, process, tools, and finally, thinking long term.
Great, thank you. Carrie, how would you suggest jump-starting the process? These guys are both, I love this whole notion of Copilot being able to help immediately come in and figure out where you might have security risks and respond and that kind of thing. That's pretty cool. So where would you start?
I agree with everything that's been said. I think where I would start as a risk management professional is protecting my flank. Just right off the bat, even if it's a quick back of the envelope thing that you have to do, figure out where your risk is and figure out what your appetite for risk is and mitigate the easy things that you can do. And that would be things like updating a few policies, right? Maybe you have a policy that says thou shalt not AI unless thou hast followed these steps. Or, if you want to bring a new tool into the organization, it's got to go through these individuals, just like stop the leaks, right? Then that frees you up because you don't have all this risk sitting out there. Maybe you've got some managed risk sitting there. Then you can free yourself up to start thinking about other things like strategy. I mean, the why is definitely important. And the how, that's going to come later. But like, here's some things I might update. I might adopt a data governance policy, for example, or I might update my existing data governance policy. I might update my HR policies. For example, if AI allows me to get my job done in 20 hours instead of 40, can I get another full-time job? What's the company's moonlighting policy? What's the company's conflict of interest policy? Can I be terminated if I'm caught using AI? And some of your policies probably already talk about this, but it's worth looking at them and looking at them through an AI lens to see whether there are any updates that need to be in there. There's one additional thing I would do, which is start training immediately. And that training could be anything like, hey, we're just going to start with creating awareness, like doing an assessment in your organization. How many of you have heard of AI? How many of you have done anything hands-on with AI? Are you doing any work things? Finance, are you having AI run your analytics? Oh, are you doing that with my company data? Like just generally creating awareness around what the tools are, what they can and can't do, where the dangers lie, reiterating your policies, maybe making your employees like certify that they've gotten copies of the policies. There's just really sort of basic stuff that you can do to just say, all right, we've shored up the risk piece. Now let's roll up our sleeves and start digging into the fun part, which is, well, the risk part's fun for me, but let's start digging into all the fun that we can have with this tool now that we feel that there are some guardrails and policies in place.
It's
Go ahead,
funny.
Aaron.
There's the putting the policies in place. There is a certain factor of I call it the the sign. There's a sign. Hey, don't feed the ocelots, or don't jump in the ocelot enclosure at the zoo. If there's a sign there, it's because somebody has done it before, and until somebody did it the first time, there probably wasn't a sign. And my one experience with writing policy for the company that I was working for at the time was around the not using information that was spit out by ChatGPT and putting it right into something that was going to be delivered to somebody else without analysis. And it's one of those things that is like, well, of course you're not going to do that, right? Well, until somebody does, and then there needs to be a sign. So yeah, creating signs about all the things that we know people have done that are not right first. I am right behind that.
There is a new notion, I think maybe it's not new to you guys, but this whole notion of being a good digital citizen and really understanding, not only from the business perspective, but we're all consumers and we all deal with our own clients in many ways because we buy products from them and services from them. So being a digital citizen and applying critical thinking to the work that we do, the apps that we download, the information that we share, that I think is going to land on everyone's shoulders a lot more than it feels like it does today. Some of us are paranoid and some of us do that naturally, but I'm just we've talked a lot about data, and it's the it's the people who think ocelots are cute and want to go in and pet one that make it hard, right? And so how do we get the word out about all of this to clients and customers too? Is it just simply you got to read the privacy policies, Carrie? I mean, seriously, terms of service, you like doing that. I can't stand it myself, so I just usually accept all, right?
I mean, most people do because they want the shiny thing, and that's the great part about the strategy is they released this thing into the wild and we were all like just piranhas gobbling it up. It is so fun to go on to ChatGPT or Claude or any of those things and see what they can do. Nobody will find this very, maybe interesting, but the first thing I had it do was I wanted to test its legal chops, and I asked it to draft a promissory note, and I wanted to see how close it got to actually including all the magic language. I asked it to create an amortization schedule, and I can't repeat what the words that came out of my mouth when I saw how competent it was. And now I ask it to do things like help me with a recipe or whatever, but it's such a fun tool. And then one of the main things about it is that as an employee, you're working on something and maybe you don't fully understand all the parameters of it, but you could go to ChatGPT and it could explain some things to you and put some context around it. And now you are really engaged in what you're doing because you understand a little more about the implications of how something works, or it can augment where you are. It helps you get a little farther faster. Like, that is brilliant. And how are we supposed to not use that? But then you go look at the terms of service and you're like, oh God, like, what have I done? What have I done? So, but that's where, a company like Atmosera comes in, is that they can help you build those, you know, those data structures, those taxonomy systems, those parts of your cybersecurity that need to be really looked at. They can be an architect of all of that and help you figure out, where do I really need to focus? Because I can't focus on all the things at once. So let's just, what are the big ones? Let's do the big stuff first. How do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? And you could figure out where it actually is safe and fun to play by following these particular guardrails and guidelines and things like that. And, you know, maybe where we don't want to go in the water just yet because it's stingray season. You know, for those of us that live on the West Coast, right? You shuffle your feet before you go in the water. So I think it has a lot of promise. As Janet said, we're very, very bullish on the technology. It's super fun, and it has a ton of really great applications. But, you know, you got to be smart about it. And there are things that you can do that are just common sense, straightforward, a lot of the unsexy stuff that you've already been doing, but through an AI lens. And then you can do this in a safe way, and it's, you at least mitigate the potential harms and damages that, you know, you might have to your people or your brand or the tools.
Yep, that's great. Thank you. And if anyone has any questions, please put them in the question Q&A area, because we want to make sure that we can address. One question came up is, thank you, Mark, for asking, is the session being recorded? And can it be shared with the group? Yes, it will be. It is being recorded, and Rachel has promised she's going to make sure everybody gets a copy of the link. So we will definitely be sharing that. If you have any other questions, though, please do let us know. We have a bunch of smart people here, as you can tell. Atmosera is really set up to, I concur, to lead you safely into this area because of people like Aaron who think about this deeply, right? I mean, that's your thing going forward, Aaron, right?
Well, yeah, and you know, to go back to where would we start, right? Even before we start, if I'm gonna go and do a tightrope walk across, you know, a big canyon, right? What's the first thing I want is that, not being a flying Melinda, is to have a safety net in place, right? So where do I start? I want to string up my safety net, and that's where going back to the first principles of, you know, let's get our information protection regimen in order. Let's know what our data classification is. Let's have data loss prevention protections in place, because we know, you know, people will engage in all sorts of wacky stuff with shadow IT, and, you know, give access to things that shouldn't necessarily have access, or not configure things properly. So, you know, we're going to want to have some sort of monitoring if the wrong information is leaving our environment. And yeah,
That's great.
put the net in place first.
Put the net in place first. And Leon, you know, from the very base layer of data, now we know the base layer is governance, and data governance is such a huge thing going forward. Anything else that you would recommend thinking about that we haven't talked about yet?
Yeah, a little bit about how the I think the future going to look like. What we're seeing so far is the first generation of Gen AI. And if you look back in the internet era, our first internet product, it's just simple World Wide Web, you know, World Wide Web, where you actually using Microsoft Word document to create. You know, nobody can predict at that time, you know, what we can do with the Web 2.0 and so forth. And you know, then we go to mobile. Same thing right now. We are so fixated on ChatGPT, right? And we probably, all our future decision making is based on this product that's still in early stage. It's not even remotely what's capable for, right? And the thing that I'm starting seeing is that currently ChatGPT trained on a public data, right? I think in the future, not that distance, Azure coming out with what I call the intranet version of it, where it can feed on your internet, internal data in your company, your order history, and so forth. And that's when I start seeing its potential. Having somebody that you can just, like you mentioned, taking Copilot, but taking it into like 3, 4, 5 layer deeper. Looking into all of this stuff and start asking questions. Hey, what should I do, and so forth. I think during that time, the governance become more and more important, right? You better be as good or at least as smart as your tools that you're using. I mean, this is the first time our tools is getting smarter, and yet we are start relying on them more and more. We look at it, it's like we ask the question, like Carrie said, it's like, oh, create me some kind of, like paperwork that only legal people knows, and they're getting 98%. The next step that I was thinking about it, I become more comfortable with the tools, and I'm going to provide more and more data without knowing, without worry about this data could create some kind of what we call hallucination, wrong answer. It's a predictive engine. It's a probability. There's got to be 0.1% chance or whatever this percentage, it can make mistakes. When that thing happened, is anybody in the organization knows it was a mistake? And that's what I think it is. We should start thinking ahead. This is why governance for me, it's a long time. It's going to take a long process, and my passion now, because I've seen what the damage if you don't do it properly. Nobody knows if you make mistake, and that's dangerous.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we are almost at the top of the hour. Aaron, do you mind putting the next slide up if you can advance the slides? Because we would love to get feedback with regard to all this data governance stuff, and if you would like any more consultation around it. I know that Atmosera is all over that, and we would love to take any question you have and continue this discussion. So please do provide feedback and talk to us some more. I think that would be great. And thank you very much for being such a great audience. We really appreciate you. And thank you, panelists. Aaron, Leon,
thank you.
Dear Carrie, off screen, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.